Today on the HopeFilled Financial Podcast, I found the CNBC millennial money story about a couple who retired in their mid to late 30s with only $870,000. I sincerely hope that you find value and entertainment as we discuss their story. Before jumping into the main topic, my top 5 tips for retiring before age 59 and a half. These tips weave together, so you're not going to want to miss any of them. Good morning and welcome to the HopeFilled Financial Podcast. My name is Jay Disberger, your one and only HopeFilled financial coach, and I'm happy that you're here with us today. Before we jump into reacting to the CNBC millennial money story, I want to give a quick update for those of you who like the video portion of the podcast. The B-roll that I record on has much higher video quality now, and that's because I've finally upgraded my camera from the one on an iPhone 7 Plus to what you see now, which is being filmed on an iPhone 13 mini. I'm actually selling that old iPhone 7 Plus on eBay right now. It's the phone that I used to call Dave Ramsey, and it's the one that I've used to film the B-roll for all of the HopeFilled Financial Podcast up till this episode. And on the off chance that you're looking for an old retro phone or the one that I used to call the Dave Ramsey Show, that auction ends tonight at 10:44 Central Standard Time. With that out of the way, let's jump into the CNBC Millennial Money retiring early on $870,000 in Arizona.
I'm Steve and I'm 39.
And I'm Courtney and I'm 36.
And we retired in our mid-30s with $870,000.
And live a little bit outside of Tucson, Arizona.
Now, for those of you who can't see the video, it says that since retiring when she was 33 and he was 35, their net worth has grown from $870,000 to $1.2 million at the time of recording.
What's nice is that our day-to-day lives both have structure, but they don't have to. Because we don't have full-time jobs, we can choose to do things on a Wednesday or a Tuesday or whenever.
Early retirement for me isn't about just not working, it's about freedom. The freedom to design your day to do whatever you want during the day. So for me, that means getting up around 6 a.m. Maybe I work out for a couple of hours. I mess around on the computer for a while, do email, social media, that kind of thing. We go out and take walks with the dogs at about 10 a.m. The freedom is a complete life-changing event.
Right here, Steve talks about how retiring early enables them to design their day any way that they desire. And it sounds like they have relatively busy schedules even though they are retired. And I've heard it from those who I know who are retired, traditionally retired, but all the same. They wonder, how does anybody take care of their day-to-day stuff when they're working a full-time job? There's just so much to do. In this particular case, I don't think there's a major concern about this couple sitting around and doing nothing all day. It sounds like they're doing a wonderful job living the life that they want to live and taking good care of each other. I really like that Steve said that the freedom is a game changer, because what they have, in other words, and the way I like to say it, is the ability to do stuff because they want to, not because they have to. They may still do work because they want to, not because they have to. When you have the freedom to do something without the pressure of doing it, you feel more engaged. You enjoy it more. You can be happier.
My wife, Courtney, has always been way more of a saver than I was. Before we got married, I had the house in the suburbs. I had a supercharged Corvette convertible. I had a brand new Cadillac CTS. I had a Yamaha R1 sport bike. I had all the toys. I spent a lot of money.
Okay, one of the things I really appreciate about this part of the story is Steve saying that he was a big spender. He liked to have the big fancy things. He liked to have the toys, and that he enjoyed spending the money. And together, they find a balance in their early retirement, in their marriage on the whole. He helps them find a way to spend money in a way that is enjoyable, in ways that Courtney might not be open to without him. And she helps him say no to things that are not frugal so that they can meet their savings goals and maintain their early retirement. We're going to jump forward in the video a little bit, but the text on the screen throughout a little musical montage says that Steve worked as an IT consultant and made $120,000, $125,000 before they retired, and that Courtney was making about $110,000 a year. So they both brought home 6 figures back in 2014 when they started their journey toward early retirement, their journey toward achieving FIRE.
We figured out we needed to save between $800,000 and $900,000 as long as we kept our lifestyle pretty minimal and did some big changes like moved into our Airstream and were able to keep our monthly expenses down to a minimum.
That, in my opinion, represents a massive sacrifice and one that should not be overlooked. They very clearly wanted this early retirement more than they wanted the American dream of a suburban house, a white picket fence, etc.
It also included more normal things like cutting our restaurant budget way down. I think at one point we're down to, at max, $50 a month combined for anything outside of the house.
That makes me smile a lot because Amanda and I right now hardly eat out ever. We're not trying to achieve FIRE, but our average is probably less than $30 a month. There are many months where we don't eat out at all.
We tracked all of our groceries. We got rid of all of our subscriptions that we weren't actually using.
We decided that we wanted early retirement more than we wanted some of the nicer things in life that other people might want to spend money on.
There it is. They got on a budget. They cut back on the things that were not bringing them the joy. They would cut back on the things that were not optimizing their happiness. They wanted to do the frugal thing by retiring early. Their priority, their joy, was more closely tied to being able to make life decisions on their day-to-day because they want to, not because they have to. Remember, frugality is the intentional practice of prudent economy. And when it comes to economy, we want to pursue roughly the 80-20 rule. Something that gets us 80% of our happiness is probably going to be roughly 20% the cost of something that embodies everything we really want. In a future episode, I'll actually talk about how buying the iPhone that I did for upgrading the recording on the podcast here really fell into that 80-20 rule. So subscribe if you don't want to miss that. But here, for Steve and Courtney, following the 80-20 rule, following economy, following frugality is embodied by retiring early.
So we maxed out both of our retirement accounts. We also saved more money than that. So at one point we were saving 70% of our combined income. So all of my income and some of Steve's. And that was going into our 401ks and Roth IRAs, but also into a brokerage account and a savings account.
We're going to be talking about that in the main topic, so hold on through this story if you don't want to miss it. We're going to jump forward a little bit because they go through another musical montage with some text on the screen. Steve and Courtney got their burn rate down to $30,000 per year, so that's how much money they needed to pull out of their nest egg to live on when they first retired early. In 2021, when this episode was recorded, their burn rate is now between $40,000 and $50,000 a year. So they are seeing an increase in their burn rate, tracking with inflation and lifestyle changes.
As a married couple, we have a combined checking account as well as savings account. We keep everything together. That makes it simple for us. So we talk about every single purchase. We agree on everything that we spend money on, and it's very easy.
Now, if you're listening to audio only, what they've displayed in the video at this time is a pie chart breakdown of Steve and Courtney's monthly budget at the time that they recorded this episode. The biggest expense that they have would be food, groceries, $750 a month. Now, there's a little asterisk on it, which says that includes alcohol. So I'd say that at the time that this was recorded, $750 would be a lot for groceries unless it was something that they really prioritized, having the best of the best food and exploring more expensive cuisine or enjoying more alcoholic beverages. Their next biggest expense is going to be insurance, $651 a month. That's very specific. That includes health, homeowners, truck, and insurance on their Airstream. Now, they have business expenses, which means that they must be running some sort of business on the side in their retirement in order to generate some revenue, working because they want to, not because they have to. They put $333 a month into their business. Unfortunately, this video doesn't give us any details on what business they're running and what the $333 represents as far as tangible expenses. The next biggest category is going to be dining out. That's $250, followed by property taxes, which are only $144. I'm betting you that they chose where they retired in Arizona, possibly due to the property taxes. The subscriptions that they have are $132 a month. Now, that includes Wi-Fi, gym, Netflix, Discovery Plus, and Amazon Prime. Next is their discretionary, which is $115 a month. That's relatively frugal, if I do say so myself. That includes dog food and gifts, according to the asterisk on it. Finally, the smallest two categories that they have in their budget are gas and phone. They spend $72 a month on gas and $55 a month on their phone.
We have a grand total of $0 in debt.
Yes.
And that is an important ingredient in retiring early, in retirement in general, getting your outstanding debt to zero.
We will go to a grocery store about 45 minutes away once every week and a half or so for a normal shop. We also get veggies from our community farm through a CSA program, a community-sponsored agricultural program, so that's once a week. And then we'll do our big bulk buys at like Costco in Tucson.
One thing I really appreciate about the way that they broke down their grocery expenses is emphasizing that they're purchasing food that they want to purchase, and the way they go about it with their budget balances between regular grocery shopping, purchasing farm fresh produce, and doing bulk purchases. It's been a question on the podcast back when I used to take listener questions and do a whole segment on that. Hey, how do I budget for groceries if I like to buy things in bulk? And I think that's a question many people have when they are starting a budget, because buying in bulk is typically something you pursue in order to reduce your overall cost per plate, but it involves so much more upfront spending. You feel like you have to rationalize spending more, and thus a budget doesn't sound like it would work. But you just simply give yourself a limit. You break it out as a separate line item if it's something that's difficult for you to manage.
Day to day, we don't actually spend that much time on our general finances, but maybe 5 to 10 minutes a day, a total of about an hour a week, will be spent looking at everything and making sure everything is still going the way we want it to, and we're not going to run out of money in any of our accounts.
This is nice. They spend very little time every day, up to an hour a week, managing their money at this point. This is an earmark of a couple who has done very well in figuring out how to mesh and join their financial journey together, how to communicate well on money, how to communicate well on everything. And they have their process for financial management down to a science, to the point that it does not really interfere with their day-to-day living. It simply enables them to live their dream. It gives them permission to have this early retirement. This here is interesting. On the video, text on screen says that Courtney and Steve use the 4% rule to withdraw their money. Pay attention to how they characterize this.
So we take a look at what our net worth is currently, and 4% of that or less is kind of our budget for the year. So if we're having a good year and we're making money, we can be a little bit more flexible with our lifestyle. And then if we're in a down market, we will really cut back.
Okay, this is really important to get right. The way that she talked about the 4% rule was taking 4% of what they currently have, not 4% of where they were when they initially retired, not 4% of that $870,000. They're not following the constant dollar method that's very tightly and normally appropriately associated with the 4% rule back from the Trinity study in 1994. She's talking about a relative safe withdrawal rate. And she also said that when they take out their money for the year, as they're withdrawing cash to live off of, they're taking out up to 4% of a rolling value. That's probably very conservative. They likely, from historical data and my understanding, are at very low risk of running out of money. But they are also in a situation where their income does go up and down. It's a bit of a roller coaster. That is not for everyone. For many of the people I've worked with, the constant dollar method is much more attractive because it allows income stability with a sense of security.
Our rule of thumb when it comes to when we actually sell our investments and take money out is we only do it in an up market if we can help it, which is why we have that savings account there. And we'll sell stock to get money in an up market if, one, we need to replenish our savings, or two, we have a big purchase that we're planning to make in the near future.
Now on screen here, the text reads that they try to keep between $60,000 and $80,000 in their savings account. Now I doubt that that is all emergency fund, but we're starting to get close to maybe simulating or even living out the 2 bucket strategy that we talked about 2-3 weeks ago. In the 2 bucket strategy episode, we studied what it does to have 2 years worth of expenses in cash. Now, we on this podcast sincerely appreciate having an emergency fund. 3 to 6 months of your expenses in an emergency fund is largely a prudent and frugal thing to do. If I remember right, the video said that Steve and Courtney are living off of, at the time this was made, $50,000 a year. So having $60,000 to $80,000 in their savings borders around 14 to maybe 18 months ish of their expenses. Again, I don't think all of it is emergency funds, but it definitely falls within the range of the 2 bucket strategy recommendation, especially as you might hear from the money guys and other experts who are proponents of the 2 bucket strategy.
We were in a little mini but sharp recession. And my friends and some of my family were begging me to sell to get out of the market because everything is going to crash. But for us, we did not do that. We did not sell a single share of stock during the economic downturn. And since then, we have recovered about 150%. So that's $250,000, $300,000 since April of last year. So we are now in a better position than we were before, precisely because we did not try to time the market.
I feel like the way that that was described is less about not timing the market and more about not reacting out of fear, not reacting out of false evidence appearing real. I remember that sharp downturn. I think it was around 30% for me. That's what I realized for the drop in my nest egg value. And it was very short lived. It came down all in the span of a couple weeks to a month and then recovered rapidly throughout the rest of that year. In this particular case, people were urging this couple to get out of the market because it was scary, everything was going to crash. That's not necessarily timing the market, because if you're trying to time the market, you typically try to buy low and sell high. This is more indicative of Steve and Courtney pulling money out of a very good performing market that seems to be hitting new highs in order to refill their savings. They are smartly timing their withdrawals to when it is efficient versus when it's inefficient, and they've given themselves the flexibility in order to do that. Now, when I hear about timing the market, I'm typically don't think as much about selling at highs in order to be efficient with a distribution strategy. I typically think about trying to contribute to a nest egg when the market is down, when the market has a dip or a little mini recession. Because sometimes you can be holding on to what you want to contribute in the market for a long time, waiting for that downturn. And the majority of financial advisors out there would tell you it's not about timing the market, it's about time in the market. I think we're going to leave the video there. I cut it a little early. If you want to watch the whole thing again, we'll link it in the description so you can find the entirety of the CNBC Millennial Money episode. And I'm very curious as to what you think of this whole retire early effort that Steve and Courtney made in particular. I think it's incredible that they were able to retire early and facilitate it successfully with less than $1 million. I think personally that their story is inspiring, that they know what makes them happy and they were willing to work hard and sacrifice for it. I know that one of the big criticisms that FIRE will get is that you have to have an outstanding income in order to achieve it. And they did together. They both were earning 6+ figures. They were over $200,000 in income as a combined couple. So they were able to really ramp this up by getting rid of their main big living expenses. I think later in the video they talk about in 2016, they sold their house and moved into the Airstream as they described earlier. They got rid of their biggest expense, their housing expense. They sacrificed a great deal of living comforts and a lot of the toys that Steve had purchased in order to make this dream a reality. Is that something that you would do? Would you sell a lot of the toys that you've worked hard to get today in order to achieve a dream, be it FIRE or some other major financial goal? And what stuck out to you in this story? I want you to be thinking about that as we roll into today's main topic. Today's main topic is going to be going through my top 5 tips if you want to retire before age 59 and a half. I'm not going to be able to cover everything you need to know to be able to do this, but the tips I'm going to share with you should help if that's something that appeals to you. Now, my first tip is going to be that Roth contributions, Roth IRA contributions, can be withdrawn at any point without penalty. Now, that doesn't include the growth. That is just the contributions. For example, if you were to invest $500 every month for 30 years, you'd have about $180,000 in contributions. Hopefully, your account has been invested well and it's grown well beyond that. But the IRS, to my understanding, this isn't tax advice, it's just my understanding of the code, says that when you withdraw from a Roth IRA, you're withdrawing contributions first. They count the first dollars out as contribution dollars. And their rules say that those contribution dollars can be taken out at any point. For the growth, you can't touch it without penalty until after age 59 and a half. That's why age 59 and a half right now, at the time of this recording, is such a pinnacle tipping point. Because if you've poured a lot of time, blood, sweat, and tears into growing your nest eggs in tax sheltered accounts, be them IRAs or 401ks, 403bs, you think about it as something that you can't touch until you're basically 60. But this rule about being able to take contributions out from your Roth at any time means that you might be able to bump your retirement back a little bit. Let's say that you needed $90,000 to live on in retirement. Well, $180,000 in contributions is going to be 2 years worth of expenses for you. So you'd be able to retire hypothetically at age 57 and a half instead of age 59 and a half and get yourself just a little bit more time in retirement. For my second tip, we're going to be talking about the rule of 55. Now, the rule of 55 states that if you retire or leave your job, you could be fired, you could be laid off, you could quit for any reason between age 55 and age 59 and a half, you can simply start engaging with withdrawing your nest egg monies in that employer sponsored account without penalty, without taxes. This is a very complicated rule when you dig into it, but the simplified overview, the primer, the basics are if you have an employer at age 55 or after, and that same employer has an employee sponsored account tied to you, then you quit or get fired. You can engage with withdrawing that money as long as you don't move that 401k or 403b, whatever employer sponsored account you have. This applies to both Roth and traditional retirement accounts. So Roth 401ks and 401ks alike apply to Rule 55. So that you have a source other than me, I have an Investopedia article about the Rule of 55 right here. The key takeaways that they list are the Rule of 55 is an IRS rule that allows certain workers to avoid the 10% early withdrawal penalty when taking money out of workplace retirement plans before age 59 and a half. To qualify for the Rule of 55, withdrawals must be made in the year that an employee turns 55 or older and leaves their employer, either due to early retirement or for any other reason. The Rule of 55 only applies to workplace plans. What's more, plans are not required to include the provision. I want you to pay extra close attention to that point. Plans are not required to be able to implement this provision. Lastly, retirement plan distributions taken using the Rule of 55 would still be subject to ordinary income tax. Now, if you want to learn more about this rule, I'll link this article in the description below so that you can dig into it and understand the complexities of it. I personally would say if you want to engage with the Rule of 55, you should consult with a financial professional who is licensed to give professional financial advice by the SEC. Now, I can't remember if it was this article that mentioned it or another one that I've read before, but if you are a safety service worker, someone like a first responder or an air traffic controller at an airport, you may qualify to actually engage with the rule of 55 at age 50, so an additional 5 years earlier. Depending on your career, there may be specific rules that tweak this rule to you. So you really should engage with a financial expert, a financial advisor, a fiduciary who is licensed to give financial advice if this interests you. Now, just because I mentioned tip one about the Roth contributions first, I don't want you to think that you can add these two tips together to even further bump your retirement back because, for example, this is how the rule of 55 can get complicated. Let's say you were looking at this saying, hey, I can engage with rule 55 and then take the Roth contributions and bump it backwards and retire at age 53 if I had that 2 years worth of expenses and contributions on Roth. That wouldn't work because if you retired at age 53, the rule of 55 no longer applies to you because you retired before age 55. So you can't stack it, but you can use the Roth contributions as a buffer in the case that you needed to have some sort of extra access during the time between age 55 and age 59 and a half to monies that would you'd have no other way of getting without going back to work. Okay, my third tip is going to be build a bridge account or a brokerage account to bridge the gap between when you want to retire and age 59 and a half. Now, this is a taxable account that you have with a broker or a financial advisor. When you pull the money out, it is taxed at capital gains rates. It is not tax sheltered like an IRA, 401k, or a 403b. And your distribution strategy for your bridge account is going to be dependent upon how long it needs to bridge your gap. For example, let's say you had a very short period of time. You wanted to follow tip number one and back up your retirement using Roth contributions by, say, 1 year, because that's what you have. And you're like, I'd like to retire a little bit earlier. I just don't have enough contributions in my Roth because I started it later than I wanted to. And I have so much more that's in my nest egg. I just need to have something that can get me a couple years earlier because I don't want to be working anymore. You can save up 2 years worth of expenses in the bridge account, put it in something that's very conservative so that it can keep up with inflation, like a high yield savings account, and just draw it down. You don't have to invest the bridge account in this case into something that can last forever, as if you have an indefinite amount of time, because you know how long it needs to last. You know exactly when you're going to be able to engage with the rest of your nest egg. And if the rest of your nest egg is enough, you don't have to treat the bridge account the way that you do the nest eggs with the 4% rule or other more sophisticated distribution strategies used to solve the problem of time and sequence of returns risk. Conversely, if you needed to have a bridge account that bridged more than 5 years, there is going to be a difficulty in saving up enough to draw down through those 5 years or more. When you work with a financial advisor and you're wanting to bridge a gap that's more than 5 years, they're probably going to steer you to some more aggressive investments, something that's less conservative, and something that has a drawdown that engages with a little bit more of that sequence of returns risk. It's going to be something that gets sophisticated because you have a finite amount of time, but it's going to become increasingly more challenging to retire early, and you can retire even earlier if you allow that money to work for you, if there's enough of a time horizon for that early retirement. For you, I don't know if that's going to be fully engaging with the 4% rule or a relative withdrawal rate like Stephen Courtney did. It might be some sort of combination of things. But whatever you do, if you have a long-term bridge account, you need to understand your withdrawal strategy and the risks therein. Don't do anything that you don't understand. Okay, tip number 4 is paying off your home before you retire early while genuinely understanding your budget. No matter when you retire, be it before or after age 59 and a half, I believe that it's best for you to have a paid off home so that you don't have a mortgage or rent over your head increasing the burn rate that you need to manage with your nest egg. If you can get rid of your biggest expense, just like Stephen Courtney did in the story, the housing, the mortgage, you can have a much smaller nest egg than otherwise would be needed to retire early. So part of your working toward an early retirement, if that's your goal, should involve minimizing or eliminating your housing costs. There are a lot of different ways to go about this, but the way that I would pursue it personally would be to have a mortgage that gets paid off sometime before I engaged with early retirement. And with your budget, you need to know what your expenses are going to be over and beyond the housing. You need to know what your expenses are going to look like in your retirement so that you can most accurately determine how much money you need in your nest egg and engage with tip number 5, which is to map out the different phases of your retirement. This is very, very important if you retire early. See, if you retire after age 59 and a half, it may feel like you only have one block of life, one final season that you have to plan for. The safe withdrawal rate from the point of retirement to the time of your passing. But that is not necessarily the case. Early on in your retirement, you may very well be more active. You might want to travel more than you do later on. There's something called the retirement smile. It's more or less the anticipated graph of what your expenses are going to be when you retire. It starts out high, and as you become less and less active, your expenses drop down, then they bottom out. And then toward the end of your life, your medical expenses or assisted living expenses drive your burn rate back up. So you don't have a consistent need for money throughout retirement. You have seasons. You can break it up into a active season, an inactive season, and a final season. But beyond that, if you retire early, you have additional phases that need to be mapped into your plan. You might have a bridge account. You might be engaging with the rule of 55, and you might somewhere in there be engaging with the contribution rule for Roth in tip number 1. There are a lot of different options that can help you retire early, and mapping out those phases, including getting ready to retire early by paying off the mortgage and accumulating all the money you need for that early retirement. It's going to take different seasons, different strategies, and if you don't piece them together like a puzzle and put them in order, you might end up solving a problem that doesn't include all of the considerations you need to make. You might be able to solve the early retirement problem by building a big bridge account and then engaging with, say, the 4% rule. But what if we have runaway inflation that really knocks things out of the park and the investments that we had didn't keep up for some reason, be it the way that they were diversified or an action that is ill-advised out of fear? Well, we can put not only our current season of early retirement, but all future seasons in jeopardy. I'll give you an example from my own personal life. I do not know if I'm going to be able to engage with the rule of 55 just because of my age. So I don't plan on working around tip number 2. I think it's one that's important to know about, but I'm not currently mapping out my plan around the rule of 55. I do like the idea of being able to bump my retirement back a little bit using my Roth contributions, but I need to be getting those back up if I'm going to engage with that plan at all. And I have a little bit of a taxable account that Amanda and I jointly own, a joint brokerage account. And it's got some money in it. We could, if we decided to retire early, start to pour a lot more into it to bridge the gap between a certain point in age 59 and a half, or a little before that if the Roth contribution thing actually works out. If I wanted to engage with that, though, I'd want to make sure that by the time we hit age 59 and a half, our retirement accounts, minus any of the Roth contributions I want to live off of early, would be large enough to sustain retirement thereafter, and that the brokerage account doesn't usurp that goal. I want to make sure that my retirement accounts are going to be adequate, that I hit coasting financial independence within my retirement accounts before starting to rev up my taxable brokerage bridge accounts. And I know that doesn't go into too much detail, but that gives you an idea of the sort of thinking that you might have as you're starting to map out the different phases of retirement from early retirement onward. And that concludes my top 5 tips. Again, your contributions for a Roth account can be pulled out at any time, so that can help you retire a little earlier. The rule of 55 is very interesting and something that some of you may want to consider, and something that you might take to a financial advisor. Then there are bridge accounts that you can have. And the way that you treat your bridge account for your distribution phase for age 59 and a half is going to be very dependent upon how long that bridge account needs to last. It's going to be important for you to get your home paid off early and understand your retirement budget throughout all phases, and then to map out all the different phases of your retirement like puzzle pieces that mesh together so that you do not jeopardize any season of your retirement. Now, if I missed something that you think should be in the top 5 tips for early retirement, please let me know in the comments below. And until next week, until next Tuesday, budget bravely and enjoy your hope-filled financial future.